Welcome to Connection is the Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Eaden. Today I welcome Yogi, teacher, and best-selling author Tracee Stanley. On this episode, we explore her transition from a successful modeling career, next as a Hollywood film executive, and more recently, a yoga teacher and spiritual guide. Tracee is a 28-year devotee of Sri Vidya Tantra yoga in the lineage of the Himalayan masters. Her latest book, Living Ritual, helps us infuse daily life with purpose, connection, and spirit. What a blessing to spend time with Tracee, and without further ado, let's dive right into the show. Hi, Tracee. Welcome to Connection is the Medicine.
Hi, Eaden. It's so wonderful to be here and to be with you.
I love to start out the show with some crossroads moments so that our listeners can gain some insight into your past and how important moments in your past led you to where you are right now. And I know that we spoke about this briefly before the show, and I'd like to start out by asking you to share about your peaceful warrior gas station burning down moment as the first piece of your share.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel like this is an important crossroads because it was the first time that I ever realized that I was at a crossroads. And it was so potent. I was living in South Africa, and I was there modeling many years ago. And I was sitting on a balcony watching the sunrise, and I had this moment of just absolute peace and bliss where I felt a connection to everything that was, all the nature, all the questions that I had in my mind seemed like they were being answered. And it was this moment that felt like it lasted forever, but it probably was only a minute or, a couple of minutes. And I did not know what happened to me. I knew something happened, but I didn't know what it was. And nobody that was in my circle of friends knew what had happened. They all thought, it sounds crazy. Oh, you must have just been tired. And finally, I found one friend who said, oh, I know exactly what happened to you. And he took me to a spiritual bookstore, which was the first time I had ever been in a spiritual bookstore. And he started piling me up with all these different books, Illusions, Celestine Prophecy, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, Khalil Gibran, the Tantra book from Harish Johari. So I had all these books, and I was an avid reader. And anytime that I wasn't working, I just was reading through these books. And there was a moment in time where I felt like something was going to change. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I wanted to make a shift. Like I felt like I was done modeling. I had these ideas about, because I was living in very newly post-apartheid South Africa, and Nelson Mandela had just been elected president. And I was seeing these contradictions in what was happening in life there. And I thought, oh, this would make such an interesting documentary. Maybe one day I'll learn how to, get financing. And I was lucky enough to be able to buy a bunch of cameras because the embargoes had not been lifted yet. And I could buy these cameras that were basically not useful to anyone because they couldn't get the film. But what wound up happening is on a trip back from Johannesburg to Cape Town, a girlfriend picked me up from the airport and we decided to stop for a tea. Mm-hmm. And I had all of my belongings in her car, and I was reading Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. And when we came back to the car, I saw one of my shoes on the floor, on the ground, like in the distance. And I was like, oh, someone's broken into her car. And we looked at the back boot of the car, and the whole thing was smashed. And all of my belongings were gone. And I just remember connecting back to that moment that I had read in The Peaceful Warrior, where the gas station, the cafe, basically burns down. And it's this kind of symbolism in the book around non-attachment. And I was like, oh, this is just like the gas station and the cafe moment in Peaceful Warrior. This to me means that this is giving me like an opportunity to make a shift. And I'm done with modeling. So I made that decision like right there while I was picking up the glass and doing all the rest of the things. And as we opened the boot of her car, the only thing that was left in the car was Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. And inside the book, I had my passport and my ticket home because I was planning on going home for like 3 weeks and then coming back. So I was like, oh, look, here's my ticket, here's my passport. I called the agency and I was like, I'm leaving. And they're like, no, you can't leave. You have a job tomorrow. You have to do this job. And I was like, no, I'm not doing this job. I'm going back home. And when I got home, I got this message from a friend who was not in the film business at all. It was somebody that I had actually worked for in a nightclub on Sunset Boulevard when I first got to LA. And he gave me a call and he said, I'm starting a production company and I would love to know if you would want to intern. And I was like, okay, this is all too bizarre that these things are coalescing together in a way that is creating a new path for me, because I'd never mentioned to this person at all that I would be interested remotely in anything having to do with production. So that was a deep crossroads because I had to deeply listen. I had to remember. And when I say remember, I mean remember what I had just read, what I'd just been touched by, the message that had come through all those different books that I had read. Remember what was calling me and not be afraid to move forward. Because it would have been easy. The agency was like, oh, don't worry, we'll get all your tear sheets, we'll get your Z cards, we'll get you new clothes. Don't worry about anything. And it was like, no, that's not the path any longer.
How long had you been in the modeling world?
At that time, about 4 to 6 years, somewhere around there, like more 4 years seriously and 2 years before that, just kind of dabbling in and out.
But it was your full-time gig.
Oh, yeah, that was how I was making a living.
Okay. Okay, so then please continue. What happened next?
What happened next? So what happened next is I came home.
Which is where?
The home at that time was Los Angeles. Okay. So I was living in LA. Came home. The production company started, and my job was to read scripts and see if they had any, value or if they were good or not. We did not know what we were doing at all. So I was reading these scripts, and the person who I was working for, their brother also had a production company, and he was married at the time to a famous actress. And so the brother that I was working for would basically take the scripts that I said were good, and he would give them to the brother. And the brother then started getting these movies financed. So after about 3 movies that were getting financed and we weren't getting pulled in, to the production, I was like, there's a weird relationship with these brothers, that something's happening, that it's not right. And the earthquake happened in LA at some point during that time. And the brother that I was working for said, I can't keep the production company going, but my brother wants to hire you. And I started working then for his wife as a development executive. And that led to a whole bunch of things, including me diving into yoga, because I knew that I needed to find yoga. And luckily there was a yoga studio right down the street from where I lived.
How did you know that you needed to find yoga? What was that part of the books and what you were learning?
It was part of the books. It was part of the Harsh Johari books. And it was also, I had gotten my first massage ever. And when I got my massage, so this is before the days of, this is when we would have the phone, and we would be like this on the phone, you know? And so I was answering the phone, and I was staying on the phone like that for hours at a time at my job. And the masseuse said, "Oh, you need to start doing yoga, because otherwise your spine is going to curve." And so I went and I found a yoga studio, and they said, "Oh, you're new to yoga, go left. You know, the advanced people go to the right." And so I went to this class, and at the end of the class, they were playing the gong. And I just remember when they played the gong, my whole heart felt like it just opened. And it felt like someone was pouring molten gold into my heart. And I'd never had that feeling before. And at the end, so I'm thinking I'm the only person that has experienced this in the class. I'm like, wow, what just happened? This was amazing, this gong. And I get up, and the woman sitting in front of me, she said, "So did you feel it?" And I was like, oh, wait, this is something alchemical. This is something that someone is creating an atmosphere for this to happen. And, you know, I'm somebody who, if I like something or I'm interested in something, I go full force for it. So I started practicing 5 days a week, going to yoga every day after work. And that was how my yoga practice began. And those classes at the time were Kundalini classes. And somebody, the teacher that I had, the Kundalini teacher that was there one day was not, the class was canceled. And so they were like, "Oh, you then go left to the other class." And I went to the other class, and the other class was like a power vinyasa class. And I was like, wait, what is this? This isn't the yoga that I've been doing. But because I was very athletic, I wanted to know more about what was happening in that class. So I started doing both types of yoga.
Yeah.
Until I read the Yoga Sutras. And when I read the Yoga Sutras, that's when my whole yoga practice completely changed.
Now, for our listeners who don't know about the Yoga Sutras, can you give us just a brief summary of what they are?
Yeah, they're really amazing, over 5,000 years old, written by Patanjali. And Patanjali was someone who people say that he was a sage, and he definitely was a sage. And he basically wrote these aphorisms around yoga, and the aphorisms are very short statements about yoga. And the aphorism that I read was Sutra 136 that really stuck with me. That basically says that there's a place inside of all of our hearts that is beyond all sorrow, that is beyond all conditioning. And that was one of the purposes of yoga, was to find this place. And when I read that, I thought, okay, I'm not sure I'm doing the right kind of yoga to find this place, but I feel like I've had glimpses of this place. And I want to know more about that. And that's what sent me down the path of trying to find a teacher that was steeped in this kind of wisdom around the Yoga Sutras and some of the more, the philosophy of yoga as opposed to the physicality of yoga.
Absolutely. And so what led next? What classes and teachers did you come to eventually make your way into the lineage that you've been involved in for many years?
Well, luckily, I got very lucky because there was a woman who lived in LA who had this place called the Yoga House. And I went to her because she was an elder in the community. And I knew that she, knew lots of people, and she had had lots of people at her yoga house. And she said, "Oh, you have to go and study Tantra. You have to study Tantra." And so I found a Tantric teacher that she introduced me to. I signed up for his teacher training, and I was introduced to the Himalayan masters and those practices of Sri Vidya. Very quickly found myself studying at the Himalayan Institute and studying with that teacher's teacher, Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat, and continue to this day to study with him. And so that was the beginning of, I think, I would actually also name that as a crossroads as well. I would also name that diversion a little bit from a purely physical yoga practice that was really concentrated on how can I, master these, how can I master peacock pose, or how can I master all these like difficult postures, to a version of yoga that was about how can I be in self mastery? How can I learn who I really am? How can I touch into these places within me that need healing, as opposed to completely kind of external, having both the external and the internal.
Absolutely. I completely understand and appreciate that, depth from the gross to the subtle. And can you share with us a little bit more about the lineage, the Himalayan masters and Tantra? Because Tantra sometimes is confused with sexual practice, but there's obviously much more to it than that. But can you differentiate or share more so we can all understand?
Yeah, so there's two different paths of Tantra. One is considered to be the right-handed path, and one is the left-handed path. And so the right-handed path uses practices and rituals and pujas and ceremonies and things like that. And the left-handed path is the path that people talk about when they are thinking about sex or using alcohol or different kinds of substances to create experiences. The path that I'm on is the right-handed path. Sri Vidya Tantra, so we can kind of break down the word, right? Sri refers to that which is auspicious, that which is beautiful, that which is full of love. Vidya is this idea of knowledge, so it's the knowledge of what is auspicious. Tantra is a word that generally means to expand or to accelerate, right? It's the practices of Tantra generally accelerate. It's also about a weaving, right? Is like, how do you weave these practices into your life? And so if we think about the practices of Sri Vidya, it's a path towards expansion and also the realization that the mind, the body, and the senses are all kind of created in a pattern that is exactly the same as the pattern of the universe. And the practices of Tantra that I study are designed to help us realize that. And I would also say to help us remember that. And so for me, I think it was very divine, because when I think about my connection later on to Sri Vidya and these practices, it brought me back to the connection that I had in that very first kind of spiritual awakening of realizing that I was connected to everything.
Yes.
Right? I didn't have words for that, but somehow I found myself in the lineage that was going to, reveal and, sort of peel back the layers to show what was really going on, as opposed to it being something that was just like this lightning that came through like a direct perception that didn't have any context behind it. Sri Vidya, I feel like, is a practice and a tradition that gives you context for all of this idea of as above, so below. Like, we have a universe inside of us, right? It is exactly the same as the universe outside of us.
Beautiful, yes. So what's coming up in me is that gong and how it touched your heart, and how you wanted to find a yogic practice that also brought you into the heart space. And can you share how your experiences with Tantra and Sri Vidya helped you to connect with your heart?
Oh, wow. Yeah. What I would say is there is, when we think about Sri, we can think about the goddesses that are so auspicious. We can think about Lakshmi. We can think about Lalita. And these are goddesses that are goddesses of abundance, goddesses of prosperity, goddesses of the triple world. goddesses of all this beauty and abundance. And I think for me, being able to think about the outward abundance that we're normally, when we say prosperity and we talk about abundance, generally we think about this idea of wealth, right? Of material wealth. But these goddesses and connecting with these goddesses, to me, connected me to my own inner abundance, my own inner wealth, my own inner kind of sanctuary, my own inner treasures that could never be taken away under any circumstances. And I think that that's the kind of knowing that when you're anchored in that within your practices, really begins, again, another crossroads. It really begins to shift your life and how you see things. And so this was all kind of playing out, these small realizations, while I was in Hollywood. And being in Hollywood around enormous amounts of abundance and prosperity that outwardly looked like what people want to create. And yet what I was also seeing, and I've talked about this before in other places, but what I was also seeing was this extreme inner poverty.
Now, in Hollywood, and we're seeing a lot of it today with social media, there's a very performative aspect to people's lives. And so you were simultaneously experiencing Hollywood, which is playing roles and creating almost dreamlike worlds for people to participate in and see. And at the same time, you're going into your yogic practice, which is revealing deeper levels and subtle levels of truth and love in your life. And so how are you holding both of those worlds?
Yeah, I was trying to be skillful at how I was holding them. And it was interesting because what I started, I think one of the first awarenesses that I had, because, my career in Hollywood started pretty much right at the same time as I started practicing yoga, is that all of these movies, the content, it all had a vibration. Mm-hmm. It all had an effect on our psyche. Whether it was something that was having an effect in the dream world, whether it was something that was somehow it had an effect on us. And so I started to feel a sense of responsibility of what I was putting out in the world. And that's where the beginning of the crossroads started. Because it was like, if I know better, I have to do better, right? If I don't want to really make another movie with a gun on the poster, right? I don't want to make a movie that's violent. And sometimes when you're working as an in-house producer, or you're working as an executive in a film company, and the company that I worked for became very successful, you're assigned projects and you're assigned, movie stars that you have to work with because you can work with them or they like you or whatever it is. And so what I did was I tried to say to the people that owned the company, we need to have another division. Let's make a new division called classics, where we're going to make kind of art house movies that have a theme of hope and resiliency and love and those kinds of things. And they were like, yeah, okay, go ahead. We'll start.
Really?
Yeah, they were on board, I have to say. They were on board for it. The reasons that they were on board were probably different than the reasons that I was wanting to do it, but they were on board. And, and then it became kind of injecting, messages into the action movies that I was doing, like almost like creating little Easter eggs, for those people who were awake, that there'd be something where someone might go down a rabbit hole to kind of look up what does that mean? Like, where is Varanasi? All those kinds of things. And then what I also noticed was some of the people that I was surrounded by. and what they were doing with this kind of newfound wealth and newfound notoriety. And what I saw was that there was a lot that was out of integrity. And so I made a number of transitions. I made one transition from the original company that I was in to a different company, and then realized that the second person who owned that company had and not the kind of integrity that I wanted to hold. And then I did my own thing and came back to work with a dear friend of mine. And ultimately, what I felt was the types of things that I wanted to talk about and to make, the world kind of needed to catch up to that.
Yeah.
So at the end of, so I got out of the business, how many years ago would that be? I'm going to say let's say 13, 14 years ago. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I was pitching projects about medical mediums, about people, shows where kind of based on like something like The Real World, but instead everybody is studying with a different guru and they're learning different practices and they come back into, so they were all different things. And what would ultimately happen is there would be one person at a company that would totally get it because they were on a spiritual path, but they couldn't bring it up the ladder to the 6 or 7 people who also had to say yes to something. Right. And so for me, I was like, I think this is a message that I'm in a place where I know exactly the type of movies or shows or content that I would want to create. And the world isn't there yet. The world will get there, and maybe I'll come back and maybe I won't. And at that time, my yoga practice has taken a much deeper turn than I ever would have imagined since then.
What led you from student to teacher on this path of yoga? When did that transition and how did that transition happen?
That's a great question, Eaden. So at some point in the midst of me becoming a successful producer and having like my first hit movie, I decided that I wanted to open a donation-only yoga studio. And the idea is that this place would be small. We could only fit like 25, 27 people in the space. And it would be donation only because I wanted to see students that looked like me. I wanted to see teachers from all different ethnic backgrounds coming in to be able to teach. I didn't have any intention of teaching. I had a partner at the time who was a teacher. And, I would go off to work and then I would come home and I would do the nighttime restorative yoga class with whoever was teaching. And on the weekends, I would take a yoga class. And it was mostly people that I knew who were friends who came in to teach. And it was wonderful. And the community was wonderful. And then there was just this one day on a Saturday where I was there getting ready to take the class, and the teacher called at the last minute and she said, "Oh, I'm not going to be able to make it, whatever." And I was like, well, it's too late for me to, get a sub, and there's people already coming into the class setting up. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to go and teach this class. So I went in and I taught the class. And at the end of the class, I was like, oh, this is way more fulfilling. Way more fulfilling than making another movie with Steven Seagal. So I have to think about this. Maybe I want to start to weave teaching yoga into my daily repertoire of what it is that I do. I thought about it and I was like, I know it sounds crazy for me to be this successful producer and also teaching yoga, but who says that I can't do that? Mm-hmm. And so I went and I took a yoga teacher training, and that was a 10-day, 200-hour teacher training, which, if I were to do that over again, I would never do that. And when I do my teacher trainings, they're over months at a time.
Absolutely.
But back in the day, it was, you got like a week or 10 days if you were lucky. And so I did this teacher training, and the teacher training was in Tantra, in the Sri Vidya tradition.
So it was.
Oh, yeah. And I started teaching at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I would teach an hour and a half long class at 6 o'clock in the morning. And everybody who would show up at that class, they were all, the executives or people who were like doing yoga before they had to go to work. And we had a shower in the studio, so it was great. And that was how everything began. I started teaching that class, and I was looking forward all the time to what I was going to teach in the class and having a committed group of students. There were maybe like 6 people who would come to the class every twice a week. I don't remember what days they were, but twice a week I would teach the class.
Sri Vidya and the Tantra, as you're describing it, has a big philosophical component. And so how did you work your classes in terms of the asana or the postures and the philosophy?
Yeah, so to me, and to this day, I would say that my primary goal is for people to taste that part of themselves that is beyond all sorrow, to taste that auspicious part, to know that they're already abundant, to eradicate the inner poverty. So, whether we did, because I don't remember exactly what I was teaching, because that was in 2002.
Yeah.
Right. But whatever I was teaching, that was the main underpinning of it. So whether it was, we would do, I can tell you for sure that we would do a lot of breath-centric asana. We would do a lot of chanting while practicing asana and repetitive movements. So a lot of what's also known as Vini Yoga, right, from Krishnamacharya and Desikachar. And what I found is that these ways of practicing were very heart-opening and very centering. And they really brought us back to a place of remembrance. And that, I think, is my goal, is that idea of remembrance, remembering who we really are and being able to see who we're not in the mirror of yoga, in the mirror of ritual.
This then led to you choosing the path of yoga as your primary path and offering and leaving Hollywood at some point in time.
Yeah, so I left Hollywood. I bought a little place in Mount Shasta.
Ah.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
It's lovely, right?
Yeah.
So I opened a place in Mount Shasta. There was, and again, it was very synchronistic. I found a place online that was an old church. And I was like, oh my God, this would be an amazing yoga studio. And at the time I had no plans on moving there. I was just like, I want like a little second something. And I made an offer, and the realtor was like, you're not going to get it. There's somebody else who has an offer that's higher than yours. And I said, you know what? Let me just write a letter to the owner and tell her what it is that I want to do. And she comes back to me like 2 days later and she says, you've got it. She said that the owner said that she had a dream that there were people that were going to be meditating in that space.
Wow.
Yeah. So that space opened again as a donation-only studio.
What led you north? Like intuitively, you were in LA. How did you work your way to Mount Shasta?
Well,
because that's kind of a small town.
It's a very small town. Yeah. So my partner at the time had a connection to weed and this place called Stewart Mineral Springs. So anytime that we had free time, we would go up to Stewart Mineral Springs. And every time I would go up there, I would just be like, oh, this is so magical. I would love to just have a house here one day. And the houses at that time were very reasonably priced. And I was just like, I'd love to have a second home here. And this would be the place that I would come to vacation. And we started to spend more and more time there. So it became like, it started out at like 3 days, and then we would, start to do a week. And what I started to notice, two things I started to notice were that the practices that I was doing were way more potent practicing them in Mount Shasta. I did not have any understanding of why at the time they were more potent, but I was like, wow, I have to do a lot less pranayama to feel something. And these practices are, they're just so much more expanding. And so at some point, when I knew that I was leaving Hollywood, I was like, oh, this is a crossroads again, that I need to actually leave Hollywood. I need to leave the vibration of Hollywood behind, because the vibration that I feel when I'm deep in nature, the vibration that I feel in the lifestyle of Shasta, where, the kind of siesta vibe is still happening in a way, because in the afternoons, everybody goes to their local creek and swims for an hour or two, and then goes back to work or goes back to doing whatever they were doing. And so there's this real connection with community that happens around the creek and around those kind of outdoor experiences. So for me, moving to Shasta was not a hard move. It was not a hard thought at all. It was like, oh, I get to be in nature. I'm going to be teaching yoga, 3 or 4 times a week. And it was just magical. I absolutely loved it.
Were you concerned about leaving resource behind? Because that's certainly a big issue for people, is the economics of choosing a path that's more soulful, that's connected, kind of this courage to leave the matrix, so to speak.
Yeah, I would definitely say there was a lot of that, and I needed to be very practical. So I looked at my expenses and I was like, okay, I need to shift these expenses to a third of what they currently are. And that's my goal, to be able to live on the third of these expenses. And at the same time, know that I'm open, that if there's something that comes through that's truly in alignment, then I can say yes to it. It allows me to be in a place where I can say no to what's not in alignment and yes to what is in alignment. And so things came through, again, synchronistically, that were in alignment. Somebody that I had worked with before on a different movie, his name is Tim Bowie. He came to me and said, I've got this movie. It's called Powder Blue. And, I think it's going to be amazing. And I want you to read it. And you have to be the one to produce it with me. And I read it and I was like, let's do this. And I kept a 310 number. So this is before you could do this with cell phones. So I had like a VoIP phone that was 310. So I was calling my friends who were agents at William Morris, and they had no idea that I was not in LA anymore, because the number was still 310, and they were calling me on that number. And, we dreamed up our favorite cast for this particular movie. And so those types of things, also sustained. Mm-hmm. And everything was in alignment. It's like if I did one movie every 18 months, I think that's what I had figured out at that time, that's sustaining. Beautiful. As opposed to 5 movies in a year or 6 movies in a year.
So let's transition now into some of the other themes and topics that are part of your present life. Tell us about Yoga Nidra.
Yeah, so Yoga Nidra is a very beautiful practice. The origins of the practice come from the idea of consecrating the body as a divine temple. So the practice of Yoga Nidra is actually a ritual first. And in today's world, we have come to know it as a technique, a relaxation technique, or a technique for deep sleep. my first experience with Yoga Nidra was not one that I was seeking out. I was at a satsang. The teacher did a short talk and then told us to lay down. And I had been practicing yoga long enough at that point, maybe, a couple of years. Like, no, actually it was like 5 years. And so I was like, we're laying down. Like, why are we laying down? We haven't done any movement, you know? And we laid down, and I was led through this journey through the body where we just brought attention to all these different parts of the body. And at each point in in the body, we saw this tiny blue twinkling star-like point of light. And we went through the whole body, through the face, through the arms, through the legs, through the toes, the fingertips, everything. And then at some point, I remember losing awareness of where we were in the body. So the last thing I remembered was, oh, we're at the left ankle. And now we're at the heart center, and I'm being asked to wake up, to come back. And so 2 things happened that day. Was like, well, first of all, where did I go? Because I feel like wherever I went, even though I don't remember it, it was someplace peaceful, someplace joyful. And at the same time, it reminded me of that feeling, maybe a little bit of like a floaty feeling, right? Of being on that balcony back again in South Africa where I had that spiritual awakening. So it was like all these little threads started connecting me back to that first experience, reminding me of that first experience. And I started practicing Yoga Nidra as much as I could. This person who was doing the satsang at the time, they had a CD. And so every single day I was doing Yoga Nidra. Every single day I was doing Yoga Nidra. And what I learned, after practicing for so many years and then kind of doing my own deep dive of research around Yoga Nidra and realizing that Yoga Nidra is also a state of consciousness. So we think about the waking state, the dreaming state, the deep sleep state. Yoga Nidra is a state beyond deep sleep. Yoga Nidra is said to be a state of Turiya, right? That is similar, if not the same, to samadhi, a peaceful bliss, a place where the true self resides. So here we go back to the same idea again that really connected me when I first read the Yoga Sutras. It's about this place in the heart center.
Beautiful.
There's different traditions that talk about the portal to Turiya. And the tradition that I study talks about it as it being in the heart center. There are other traditions that talk about it being at the third eye. And so what I really love about Yoga Nidra is that it's this practice that really acclimates us to the liminal space, to the spaces in between, because you really are in an in-between space of not here, not there when you're in Yoga Nidra, which is why it's so relaxing. I mean, I've had students before that have used Yoga Nidra when they weren't able to sleep. They just will listen to Yoga Nidra after Yoga Nidra after Yoga Nidra, like, a few Yoga Nidras in the night, so that if they know they have insomnia, and then they come back when it's time for them to get out of bed and they say, oh, I feel completely rested. And there's some people who have learned through the practice of Yoga Nidra to kind of identify that moment when they're about to fall asleep, and that helps them with their insomnia. So Yoga Nidra has a lot of different benefits to it, but as a spiritual practice, it's really a practice to remember who you really are.
And how did you experience this repetitive practice, this sadhana of Yoga Nidra, begin to shift your personal perception and connection and just ability to navigate the stresses of life and such?
Yeah, I love this question around sadhana because I think this is one of the things that I appreciate most about the Sri Vidya Tantra tradition and the practices of the Himalayan masters is that we always from day one were encouraged to practice a 40-day sadhana. And I think that when you practice a sadhana, whether it's a 7-day sadhana, a 16-day sadhana, 40, 90, 365 days, it does something to you where you really start to feel and sense into your inner resilience. And at first it may start out as feeling like, oh, this is very disciplined and I have to be very disciplined. But for me, being able to shift that discipline into devotion was something that opened my heart in a different way. And so when I started to think about, my sadhanas as devotion, and there's always some element of a deity or a mantra or something else happening in those sadhanas that is also a part of us, right? It's like the deity is a personification of an aspect of our own personality, of our own existence. And so if I can have devotion to the deity, I also have devotion to myself. That starts for me to become just a heart opening. And so I think that the sadhana offers the resilience to know that I can do something in a different way than, sometimes when I'm offering sadhanas for students and clients, you can feel that, oh, I can never do that. There's no way I'm ever going to be able to do 40 days consecutively without missing. And so I really feel like from a teacher point of view, I understand that life can get in the way, right? And so we have to soften the boundaries around the sadhana sometimes. There's ways to do things consistently and to bring our remembrance back to something, even if we don't have the time to sit with something for an hour every day or 15 minutes every day or 5 minutes. But we all have time that we can call back because we have so many distractions, especially now. So sadhana for me is something really precious. I feel like it's the jewel. Devoted sadhana is the jewel in my practice.
And when do you practice in terms of your day, your flow?
Well, the flow is all day. But my main practices happen in the morning. So I get up always before the sun rises, and I start doing my practices before the sun rises. And there's other practices that I do when the sun has risen. And then I do a little tea ritual, and I do a mind mapping practice and some journaling. And then I do some Tai Chi or some Qigong, most recently Qigong, outside, a couple of sun salutations depending on the season. So my movement practice shifts depending on what season it is. Right now I'm in that sun salutation Qigong era. And then I do a Yoga Nidra practice in the afternoon. So right now I'm doing my Yoga Nidra practice in the afternoon. In the winter, my Yoga Nidra practice is the first thing I do before I get out of bed.
And so generally, how long are your yoga nidras that you do, and are they guided or self-guided?
They're self-guided.
At this point in time?
Yeah, they're self-guided. So they're self-guided, and they're about 20 to 25 minutes. Yeah. And that's what I try to offer all of my friends and students that study with me, is getting off the recording of the Yoga Nidra and being able to self-guide, because that's where the real magic is. When you are self-guiding yourself, that changes the whole game.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a great tip.
Trust me, you start self-guiding, things change real quick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about that at some point in time. let's now transition into your present book that's going to be coming out called Living Ritual, and how this passion, this bhakti that you have for sadhana, then led into this passion for ritual and wanting to deepen in ritual and share with others about the power of ritual.
Thank you for making that connection, because it's a really important one. The desire to offer this work in the world of living ritual is really coming from this idea of the householder, right? Because we can't all live in the mountains. I certainly don't have somebody bringing me chai and making me food 3 times a day. If I did, my my sadhana practice would be completely different. I probably would not be online, you know. So the biggest kind of reflection that I would get from people was that they felt like they didn't have time to do a sadhana. And this happened, so before I wrote my first book, Radiant Rest, I remember being in Whistler, and I was talking about how you can practice yoga nidra daily and, you know, basically doing daily rituals and daily practice. And there was a man in the class who said, I have 5 kids. You wouldn't believe what I had to do to get to this workshop today, just for one day to come to this festival because I wanted to do this class. And I don't have time. And so at that moment, I gave him some kind of tips of how to create time, how to take time away from his distractions, and how to weave. And I thought, well, you know, this is not the first time I've heard this. And it feels like it needs to be something that I include in everything that I offer. So when I wrote Radiant Rest, I wrote this poem called The Householder's Prayer. And should I read it to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for letting me read this.
Yeah.
This is The Householder's Prayer. The altar is in my heart. The sun and the moon are my gurus. I trust the earth to support me. Each time I close my eyes, I enter the void. My heart is the portal to my sacred cave. I whisper the names of the divine as I prepare my meals. I notice the flow of my beloved's breath as they fall asleep, and I synchronize my breath to the flow of love. I place a blessing in the pause between the breaths. I hold the power to create a new reality with every thought. I honor silence as a blessing. I explore who I am and who I am not in the mirror of relationship. I question my beliefs with curiosity and courage. I honor my ancestors. I lay down all self-doubt with compassion and forgiveness. I remember the light of my soul as I enter the dream state. I recall the beauty of truth as I transition from sleep to waking. I know the vibration of truth. I remember that nothing is mundane. I honor the power of the transition as a portal to transformation. Everything is an offering. My life is a sacred ritual. So from that prayer that was written for Radiant Rest, this is really the end of kind of a trilogy of the books that I've written.
Please share the titles.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Radiant Rest is the first book that is a book about yoga nidra and deep rest. And
is the self-guided part of that book?
There is a part of it that tells you how to self-guide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. The Luminous Self is the next book. And that book is specifically about how to find that true part of yourself with all of the practices that lead to that. So I've pulled a lot of the practices that I've received in Tantra in that book. And the last chapter of that book is called Initiate Yourself. And Living Ritual, the new book, is really about how do we do that in the everyday. So I wanted to write a book for the householder because I do feel that sometimes a lot of books that are written about practice and about ritual make us feel like we have to have a ceremonial gown and a bunch of flower mandalas and crystals and all the things in order to have a life of ritual. It almost feels like it's not for us, right? If we're a householder and we have a family or we have responsibilities or a business. And so this book, Living Ritual, is really about how do you weave practices and rituals into every moment, whether it's that moment just before you go to sleep and you wake up, and how you get out of bed and what you do with that first kind of shard of morning light. Do you offer your samskaras to that light? Do you offer a mantra to that light? Do you offer water to the sun? You know, what do you do when you sit down for the first time to even make your morning tea or your morning coffee? That's something that is usually kind of a mindless ritual or a mindless habit, right? Can you start to pour yourself a blessing in your cup and everybody else that how do you, what are you thinking about when you're about to eat your meal? So I believe for me, practice should be, and this is from my own personal belief for myself, is that practice doesn't end when you roll up your yoga rug, right? It doesn't end when you walk out of the studio. The practice is life. And so this book is really ways to honor life as a ritual, and to also bring in some of the things that the West has lost. We've lost these ideas of rites of passage, right? Someone is going through a divorce or menopause or or the loss of a child. And sometimes the community just disappears because we're uncomfortable with loss. We're uncomfortable with change. We're uncomfortable with transition. And I think that ritual actually helps us to connect. It connects us, first of all, it connects us to a rhythm, right? When we have a consistent ritual, it connects us to a rhythm. And that rhythm is a rhythm within an inner rhythm. And eventually that inner rhythm, we start to notice the rhythms outside of us. And when we notice those rhythms, we become more connected to nature. We're just more in tune with what's happening around us. So I probably got off tangent with the question.
No, you're right on. You're right on. Yeah.
But ritual, it also becomes a constant. It's the thing that we can be certain of. In an uncertain world, if we're practicing daily ritual, I don't care if it's 3 minutes a day or if it's an hour a day. If you have one thing that you do that is you're devoted to, that belongs to you, that's where your certainty comes in. That's where your constant comes in. And if you can keep that constant, eventually it begins to kind of reveal to you the constant that is always there. Right? We're looking to the outside world to see, what's constant? No, things are dying, things are being born, things are decaying, things are blooming. There is no constant. I feel like we want to have control over that.
Yeah.
But when we have the constant of ritual, we can look within to realize, there's something in me that's dying. And there's something in me that's waiting to be born, but there's also something in me that's constant. What is that thing that's constant? Can I get closer to that thing that's constant?
That fourth state.
Yeah, that's what's beautiful about ritual. And that, to me, is the promise of ritual. The promise of ritual is really being able to taste that beauty of the true self.
And so your book really does goes for a deep dive into all facets of ritual and how to bring it into our daily lives so that we can connect more with the rhythms of nature, the rhythms of spirit, and find that heart space that you started out talking about today,
Yeah.
but also that connection to Turiya, this constant, this all that is constant.
Yeah, it's the constant that holds everything. Whether we realize Turiya or we feel Turiya is another story. It's another podcast. But there
Yeah.
is a fabric that is holding everything.
Yes.
It's holding all the states of consciousness. It's holding all the awareness.
And so what you're sharing is that these simple rituals can show up anytime throughout the day and help us connect, help us deepen, and work with the rapidly changing and chaotic world that's appearing on the outside.
Absolutely. We become more attuned to transitions when we're practicing ritual, because ritual is a lot of times done in a threshold. It's done in a place of in-betweens. That space of just before sunrise, at noon, just before the sun is setting, or just after the sun is setting. It's done when I'm about to, we can think about a marriage or ceremony being a type of ritual, or a funeral being a type of ritual. Those are the ones we're most, accustomed to. But when we start to bring in the awareness of the transitions that happen during the day, and we weave our rituals into those natural spaces of transition, I think we become more attuned to all the transitions that are happening. Even the smallest transition, like the space between our own breath. So the person who's sitting in, the conference room waiting for people to come into the, for the staff meeting, you can be doing a ritual within that space in between the breath while you're waiting for people to sit down without them even knowing what's happening.
Beautiful. So when is the book arriving?
Thank you for the arriving. I like that. The book is arriving on August 25th.
Of 2026.
Yes, of 2026. Yeah.
Great. And how else can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, you can come to my website, TraceeStanley.com. That basically has everything there. There is a little spot where if you want to sign up for our free 16-day ritual that we're going to do on the new moon before the book comes out, where we're just going to meet up for 20 minutes every morning and just do a simple ritual together. That's there. And all the events and all the things that people may want to know about are also there.
And are you still a part of and facilitating the Empowered Life Circle? Is that also still unfolding?
Yeah, that's still unfolding. It's a very vibrant community where we meet a few times a week, or I should say a few times a month, for classes. And I have all of my classes for many years that are kept on that website. And we have live guests that come and do workshops once a month. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for asking about that.
Is there anything else that you would like to share or leave us with from your book that you
Oh my goodness.
would maybe in leaving, that could be a wonderful way to leave us?
Let's see. I'll read you the opening invocation.
Beautiful.
Thank you. To anyone who has ever heard their ancestors' voice in the wind, fallen to their knees, broken a spell, paused for the setting sun, laid a rock on a headstone, shared breath with a tree, sucked the cool air off the dirt floor of the lodge, dreamed of a sacred life, cried because spring came too soon, lit a candle just because, sang prayers in the darkness, consecrated the ocean with ashes, fasted for the divine, danced beneath the stars, held hands with a stranger, remembered you were kin, witnessed the last breath. This is for you know this life is sacred.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashe.
Tracee, it was so wonderful to spend time. I loved being with you and hearing about your life and what you're sharing. And I want to thank you for what you're sharing with the world. It's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Eaden. I'm so happy to have been with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on Connection is the Medicine. This podcast is sponsored by the Connection is the Medicine Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to co-creating connection to self, community, nature, and spirit. I hope this conversation inspires you to connect with deeper meaning and purpose in your life. To learn more about our offerings at True Nature in Carbondale, Colorado, and Loma Sagrada in Nosara, Costa Rica, please visit connectionisthemedicine.com. Blessings on your day, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon.